Welcome to Trending Upwards, the SEO podcast by Digital22. I'm Tiffany. You may recognise me from our previous episode, and I'm joined today by Adrian, who's one of the new members of our SEO team. Adrian, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, just a little bit, Tiff. I've been doing I've been in the SEO industry for quite a long time now. Worked for a few companies in the past. My very first job was with Great Universal Stores, which some of the older listeners will remember. Great Universal Stores eventually became Very. They went from being a catalogue company to being essentially an online e-commerce company. Since then, I've worked for quite a few agencies across Manchester, and I'm now lucky to be working over at Digital22.
Yeah. Awesome. I remember Gus. My mum used to work at one of the call centres.
Did she? Yeah. No. Do you know something? This tells you a little bit about how it changed. When I first started working for the Great Universal Stores, I was part of one of the very first members of the digital team that they had, and this was in 1991, and there was over 250 people worked on the catalogue. And when I left the company about 2 years later, about four it was, 94 I left, there was 28 members of the digital team, and we were turning over more money than the catalogue with 255 people.
Wow, even in the early 90s?
Yes, yeah, it just rocketed. It just completely changed. The old business, they could see it going. And they started making redundancies, and the next move obviously was to move to Liverpool and rebuild the business as an online business.
Yeah, well,
it goes to show, doesn't it?
Yeah, they did the right thing, didn't they?
Well, they had no choice, did they? Everybody else was going to do it.
Yeah.
So that was the way it was. Anyway, so we're going to talk about Core Web Vitals, the new thing from Google. And why is Google actually focusing on Core Web Vitals? Well, I'll just give you an idea of what Core Web Vitals really is. The reason why Google is focusing so much on Core Web Vitals is because one of the problems they've always had in the past is the ability to understand the experience that a user has online. They've been able to tell you how many links you've got into your site. They've been able to tell you how much content you've got in your site. They've been able to tell you all those key metrics about how long people are spending on your site and how long they're looking at specific things or they're doing certain activities. But the one thing they've never, ever been able to do is get a real understanding of the experience that an individual has on a web page. And it's very difficult to do that because obviously an experience is quite subjective. It's not something that you can really say. You may have a different experience to me in terms of when you visit a website. You might find the information that you want straight away. You might find out what you want is correct or valuable to you, or you might find that it's not valuable. And one of the big problems that Google has was understanding this experience and trying to figure out what sort of metrics could be used for that. And this is essentially the first move towards having an overall page experience understanding from Google. Essentially what Core Web Vitals is it's a page experience metric from Google to determine what type of experience visitors actually get when they land on an individual page or within your website. And it's actually part of 5 such signals for a good page experience, according to Google. And the most important thing is, Tiff, that obviously it will become a ranking factor by May. By May this year, Google's going to introduce this as a ranking factor alongside the other ones. So that's the reason why Core Web Vitals has become so important now. We need to make sure that your site adheres to these key metrics, right? And obviously, with it being a ranking factor, it needs to tie in with other search signals as well. So in terms of the actual search signals we've got, I don't know if you want to talk about those a little bit, Tiff.
Yeah, you could see them going in this direction for quite a long time, even as far back as when they wanted everyone to adopt responsive design and your mobile websites. and then your HTTPS, and you be mobile friendly, providing a safe browsing experience, and then slightly more recently the intrusive interstitials. Word always trips me up with the whereas if you're getting bombarded by a pop-up as soon as you land on a website, Google's not going to have that, which is good because nobody needs that in their life.
Just for the listeners, Tiff, like you said, interstitials is just a fancy word for the pop-ups that get on your nerves, that pop up on pages.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see that for quite a while they've been heading in the direction of page experience, and now that they've got these kind of 3 metrics to try and quantify and summarize a user experience. So it's not just a techie metric that us SEOs are going to care about, which obviously we do, and we love it. But as for other members of the business and other areas of the business, even stakeholders and things like that, they need to care about this because it's trying to summarize the user experience. And if you're not providing that kind of a user experience, people are just going to leave your website and find one that does. So that's why we need to care about.
I mean, one of the key things to remember about this with Core Web Vitals is, like we said, it is becoming a ranking factor. So what that means is Google's going to use this information to decide where you're going to rank on a specific page for a specific keyword. So it's really important that you make sure that alongside these other 4 elements that Tiff mentioned about your site being mobile friendly, having safe browsing, being secure with HTTPS, and not having too many of these interstitial stroke pop-ups, you also need to have these Core Web Vitals in place, and you need to make sure that they adhere to what Google wants. Yeah,
exactly. And if at first glance it looks so technical, so the 3 sort of buckets of Core Web Vitals are largest contentful paint, which they shorten to LCP, your first input delay, with your FID, and then cumulative layout shift. Now, if you were to say that to me a few months ago, I'd be like, I just don't know what that means. But to break it down, so your largest contentful paint is just how long does it take for something to appear on the screen? So you haven't just got your white screen. It's just how long does it take for something to appear? Because that gives you the reassurance that even if you're still waiting for content to load, you can see that something's happening, and it plans you can hold out your patience, can't you? Whereas if there's nothing happening, you just want to bounce off. So things like your lazy loading, no, I can't. Lazy loading is off screen. Sorry, ignore that. And then you've got your first input delay, which is how long it takes for your page to become interactive. So even though you can see stuff, how long is it until people can actually scroll and things like that? And then your cumulative layout shift, which is how much does the content shift while it's loading? Because I'm sure it's happened to you. It's happened to me many times, especially on news websites. You start reading something, and then a second later, it's halfway down the page because an advert's come in the middle, and it's infuriating. But it can actually have a real impact on your user experience, because if you're just about to purchase something, and then the content shifts, you could have pressed your wrong bank card or something like that. So that's why it looks at those 3 things. So they sound really technical, but you can.
I mean, they can be broken down. I mean, even more simply than that. In terms of largest contentful paint, it's like Tiff said. It's really about the loading of the page, how quickly it loads, and how much information's presented. Interactivity, first input delay, the FID is really about interactivity. How quick is it before you can actually access anything on that page? Because we've all been there, like Tiff said, and we've had that problem with, where a page has been opening and it's been taking some time to actually do anything on it, and you think, oh, I'll not bother with this. And then, of course, there's this cumulative layout shift, CLS, which is really just about visual stability on the page. And the real importance of this is because everybody now is moving towards a mobile experience. We're finding less and less people are using desktop, and more people are using mobile phones. They're using mobile devices in order to access the the specific content that they want to. So that visual stability is really important. If you're using a small 6-inch screen or a 5-inch screen, if it's moving around on the page, you're going to have problems and it's going to get very frustrating. So these are some of the key reasons why Google wants you to do this. It's not just about them getting the page experience metrics that they need in order to decide where you're going to rank, but it's also about the pages that they present giving the best possible experience to the individuals that are accessing those pages, making sure that they load fast, making sure that they can interact with them quickly, and also making sure that they're visually stable and they're not moving around the mobile phone page while you're trying to use them.
Yeah, that's it. And I suppose you could also look at it from the viewpoint that those websites and businesses that are most willing to invest in Core Web Vitals, maybe they kind of deserve the ranking. I don't know. Let's not open that can of worms.
Yeah, I mean, it gets into content then, doesn't it? It gets a little bit more difficult, really, in terms of that. It is about, primarily, it's always going to be about having the right content on the site. If you haven't got the right content, Core Web Vitals is not as much of an issue. It's always going to be an issue, but if you haven't got the right content there, it won't matter really how fast your page loads or anything, because people won't find that page of the rankings.
Yeah, that's right. So they all roll in together, don't they?
So in terms of, we've talked about these Core Web Vitals, and these CWS, these new things, but what we really need to say about them as well is that, they are graded. There is a grade to these particular statistics, these metrics, and it will be broken down. Your developers will be able to see this information, but they will see the performance metrics broken down into 3 outcomes. These are good, which means that, the information, the technical stuff has been passed. Needs improvement, which is essentially obvious, it needs improvement. And then there's fail, which is obvious as well. That we know what that means. So those are 3 key things to remember about these particular metrics. They are graded in a particular way, and we all obviously aim to get good for all these different elements.
Yeah, so you can check your Core Web Vitals in all your favorite developer tools, as Google says, which feels like an advert. So you can, to be honest, you could just Google check Core Web Vitals, but you can see them in your page speed insights. They're now in Search Console, in Lighthouse, Chrome Dev Tools, couple of other Google products as well. Yeah,
I think one of the main places really where people will be looking for it, and you'll be able to see it, it's essentially if it's in your Google Search Console reports.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the key places where you would look for this information. If you were just wanting to see how you're performing, then you're not a developer, that's probably the easiest place to find that information. And then obviously you can talk to your developers about it in a bit more detail. But like Tiff says, there is different ways you can find that information. You can find it through Google's own page speed insights. There's a UX report section in Chrome, which the developers will know about and will be able to use. Same with the Chrome Dev Tools, which are quite easy to get to. There's also Web Vitals, who have an extension that will allow you to see that information. Not all of them cover all those 3 elements that we talked about, the LCP, the FID, and the CLS information. Not all of them have that, but I can guarantee that Search Console has that information. So if you were looking at it from just specifically from a marketing perspective, that I would say is probably the best place you would go to really to find out this information and then discuss it with your developer.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as a caveat there, because I thought it was interesting that there's a Web Vitals extension to check the Core Web Vitals, but I wonder if having extensions affects the Core Web Vitals. It shouldn't affect the Core Web Vitals score, but it can affect your page speed.
It can, yeah. I mean, if you go into Google Dev Tools, it will actually mention that you've got extensions running. So if you've got a lot of extensions running on your machine and you try and use Dev Tools to find out what's going on, you will find that it's slow as well. And it will tell you it's slow because you've got all these extensions that it's going through before it even gets to test the information.
Yeah, definitely. It's always worth bearing that in mind. And just if you just want to do a quick check, just easiest to check in private browsing or incognito, whichever.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, we've talked about, the performance metrics and how they're graded, but the thing we really need to talk about in a bit more detail is if your site fails or needs improvement, what actually would you need to do in order to improve that? And the good thing about Core Web Vitals and Google's Search Console and all the different tools is they actually do tell you what the issues are, and they will tell you what you need to do in order to fix them. You might not be able to fix them yourself, obviously, but it gives you that information in order to pass it on to the developer, and your agency, and actually start to discuss in a bit more detail what these issues are, and they'll be able to understand how they can fix them going forward. I mean, for example, for the large contentful paint, if you have an issue where it needs improvement or fails, they tend to be issues such as third-party scripts, where you've got things like Hotjar running on your website, or any advertising scripts that may be causing your page to go slower. They may tell you to remove those particular third-party scripts in order to make it quicker. Upgrading your web host. Sometimes it may be that your web host is not fast enough. You need a quicker server. You need a quicker. You may need to use a content delivery network in order to pass that information that's relevant in terms of large images, etc. Like Tiff mentioned before, setting up lazy loading so that the images only appear when they need to be accessed, so we're not waiting for the whole page to appear before we present it to a visitor. And also removing large page elements. Sometimes I've worked on sites in the past where they've had a big hero image banner right at the top of the page, and it's been like 4 and 5 meg. Well, when you've got an image that big, you're going to have problems. You're going to have a lot of problems in terms of loading that image quickly, depending on what you're using. I mean, you may be using a really quick laptop at home, but then again, you've got to think about it from the perspective of somebody using a budget Samsung mobile phone. How long is it going to take for it to appear on that? And the thing to remember as well, one of the actual ideal LCP, largest contentful paint measurement, should be around 2.5 seconds or faster, right? So it's important that you make sure your pages are less. It takes less than 2.5 seconds for something to appear on the page, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail about page speed and how it impacts on your performance. And it is a key impact on your appointment. There's been a lot of research into it over the last 10 years that have shown what impact it has slowing your site down in terms of revenue and leads to the site. I mean, talking about other stuff as well. I mean, you can talk about this in a bit more detail, Tiff, about first input delay and what needs to be done in order to improve that on the site.
Yeah, so your first input delay and the FID, that's how long it takes for your page to become interactive. Sometimes you can be sat there and you're poking your screen and you're like, I just want to scroll down, and you're waiting impatiently, or perhaps patiently if you're unlike most of us. And this is for anyone that's been digging into page speed improvement and this sort of thing. You have almost guaranteed been met with this suggestion to minimize or defer JavaScript, especially if it's above the fold. JavaScript is just one of those things. It's got tons of the users and it's great in some respect, but for page speed, it can be a real bone of contention. And this is where we've kind of got a bit of compromise. You've got to balance, what do you need? What don't you need? What do we need to load first? Is there anything that we can defer? Can we compress the files together? Is there any scripts we can remove, like you said, Adrian, making sure that your scripts are written properly as well. So,
Yeah. Following on from that, just a little bit of an explanation. JavaScript is a programming code that's added to the site in order to do individual tasks and to make the site, well, it's to do specific things on the browser side or sometimes on the server side, which will not necessarily be done in the normal HTML programming. So it allows you to do certain things, like have specific types of pop-ups on the page, or allow you to do interactive things within the page. There is other ways to doing it now as well. With HTML5, we're able to do more stuff than we used to. And JavaScript, while it's still useful, like Tiff said, if possible, if you can make it smaller, it does make a difference. Because the thing to remember as well is that programming code has to be actioned, which is slowing down the site. So if you can minimize it or defer it, it does make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. This is I've just remembered something when earlier when you were talking about your server side. I saw a really interesting LinkedIn post a few minutes ago, and it was a suggestion for someone that was, if you're wanting to check your core web vitals, if you've got the means to create an empty file on your site, and an empty text file, so an empty HTML file.
Yeah.
And run it through the page speed insights, and that will give you a much better idea of your server response time.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else is kind of browser facing and maybe more related to your system and things like that. So I just thought that was really interesting and worth
mentioning. It is really, when you think about that, Tiff, because one of the things the problem we've got is going back to that idea of using extensions. Visitors will be using extensions as well. People sometimes use stuff like Honey, which allows them to find the best vouchers on various sites. If they're on an e-commerce site, it crawls through the different vouchers in order to find a suitable one for that specific site you're on. And there's lots of different extensions that people have got that do stuff like that, or they give value to what they're doing. So that does slow things down as well for people. But that obviously is not core web, not an issue for core web vitals. That's a separate thing. But yeah, it's worth remembering that. I mean, following on from what I said earlier as well, it's the same issue for first input delay in terms of having third-party scripts on there, or any links to any stuff like Hotjar, anything that is a third-party tool. It might be an ad serving tool or whatever, or third party. By removing those, if you're not using them, if they're redundant, makes your site quicker, and it makes the code much more leaner for Google, and also for the search engine crawlers that Google are using.
Yeah, it's going to help them easier navigate the code, and it's going to spend the time on what you want it to spend the time on, rather than waiting through lines and lines of code that is completely unnecessary or maybe unnecessary.
Yeah. The other thing as well to remember for first input delay as well is making sure that you use, that the site's using a browser cache, which makes it a lot easier for the information to be kept on that page and just updated as and when it's needed. So if somebody's already visited your site once, rather than having to load all the information again the second time they visit the site, what it will do is the browser cache will identify where there's been changes on the page and just update them, rather than updating the whole of the page and obviously slowing down the experience for individuals. In terms of actual measurements for first input delay, so Google is saying that it should be less than 100 milliseconds, which is literally nothing. But the important thing is that what we're saying is that Google expects sites be able to pretty much be able to interact with them instantaneously, rather than having to spend time waiting for things to load or move or whatever.
Yeah.
The other thing I think we need to talk about as well is this idea of cumulative layout shift as well, CLS, which is, once again, it's the visual stability of a page. in layman's terms, it's the amount of unexpected layout movement on a page of content. It still sounds a bit complicated, to be honest, but essentially it's what's happening on the page, and can you access that information and understand it easily. So really, the things you can do in order to improve this is stuff that you'll be able to talk to your developers about. And there's stuff like using set size attribute dimensions for any media. So setting the size of those dimensions, making sure that they're not too big, making sure that they'll fit on different size layouts. If you've got any ads, making sure they've got reserved space on that page. And any new UI elements need to be below the fold as well. So you need to make sure that's not causing an issue in terms of that. And there's actually a score for CLS that they give. It's not a by seconds or anything like that, or it's actually a score, and the ideal measurement of CLS is less than 0.1. So, I mean, they've actually built a scoring system for that, Google. So you'll be able to speak to your developers about it. The key thing really to take from this is like Tiff's already said, a lot of this stuff we're talking about may be going over your head, or you may not understand it to some extent, but Core Web Vitals is really important to make sure that, you know, your site experience, your users' experience to the site is as effective as possible. So, you know, please remember that while you may not understand a lot of this technical stuff, if any of these three elements, you know, whether it's LCP or FID or CLS, if any of these elements are performing poorly or badly, need improvement or fail, they need to be fixed. You know, it's essential that you get these fixed. You need to speak to your developer about them and try and overcome these issues.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us to the point that I suppose is probably on many people's minds. They'll be thinking, well, how do we prioritize what to fix? What if we check our Core Web Vitals and it says you need to fix this? How do I know which to prioritize? I suppose there are a number of things to consider when it comes to prioritizing what to fix. Primarily, the most important for me would be to fix based on the end user experience. So those fixes that are going to have an immediate impact on the end user. So if you can easily fix your cumulative layout shift by specifying the size of your images, it's going to stop content moving around. That's hopefully a relatively quick and easy fix for your developer to do. That's going to have a huge impact on my experience as a user. And I think that should be where you should start, but you also need to consider your cost, your developer resources, and your ability to fix, because some CMSs or platforms may not allow you to interfere with certain things. And so it's about finding the compromise, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think to some extent that's right, Tiff. You know, sometimes you may find that, you know, it may not be financially viable to improve all of these elements. You know, you may be able to fix some of them, and there may be an impact in terms of that. But the other thing to take away from it, if you can't fix it now, is maybe on the next iteration of your website or your rebuild, look at these elements, make sure that they're highlighted any issues, and make sure that the new version of the site, whenever it comes, whether it be in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whenever the new version of the site comes, make sure that these elements, these Core Web Vital elements, are in place. Because one of the things to remember as well is this is quite new, this really, in terms of actual improvements to, you know, the where we do things and these page experience metrics. So what we really need to do is identify these issues and try and, you know, improve them to some extent. And I think another thing to bear in mind is some people have been saying, like, so it's like page speed not as important as Core Web Vitals. Well, it ties in with it, really. I mean, Core Web Vitals. Sorry, Tiff, were you going to say something?
Sorry, I was just saying that there's a huge overlap.
Yeah, I would say that definitely there is definitely an overlap, because page experience is also tied in with page speed. It always will be. If a page is slow or a website is slow, you tend to leave it and you don't go back to it. Really, Core Web Vitals is really about using the metrics to gauge the user experience, whether it's desktop, mobile, or tablet. But when it actually comes to the mobile pages, speed and size still matter. According to StatCount, mobile in 2020 now accounts for 44%, of all use, and is still growing, while desktop accounts for 49.5%, but it's decreasing. More and more people are using the mobile phones, so they're using them in a business environment as well. I think we've got to the point with mobiles where, you can do a lot of your work on a mobile. Some of the things are obviously more difficult. Excel spreadsheets will be pretty difficult, but you can certainly do a lot of the stuff that you want to. All your emails, all your accessing sites, etc. You've got app versions of them, etc. So you really need to look at it from that perspective of making sure that page speed for your site's correct. Because really you can see that it definitely has a direct experience on user experience and ultimately your revenue. There is research that's been done which shows that a 1 second delay results in a 7% drop in conversions, which is huge, really. Amazon did some work about 10 years ago about it. They were well ahead of the curve, really, in terms of page speed. And they reckoned that, by cutting so many seconds off the experience, it increased revenue by X amount. So, just for example, Small SEO Tools and Strange Loop, they did some research into it, and the data they showed proved that, if it drops by 7% your conversion rate, and your website's driving 100K per day in sales, that's equivalent to 2.5 million in lost conversions over the year, which is huge.
Yeah,
huge. That says everything about why you need your site to be quick.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you're if you're wanting to push through fixtures for Core Web Vitals and you're struggling to get buy-in, all you need is a handful of figures like that. And again, it comes back to if you prioritizing a fix that can immediately be seen by the end user. If that's going to then improve conversion rate, you're going to see an uptick in revenue, so you can directly attribute to that uptick against your fix, and it's going to help you get more buy-in in the future.
The other thing as well that's with the research that Strange Loop did, it's really interesting, the fact that a 1 second delay also resulted in a 16% decrease in customer satisfaction. Those are customers that, they may be your key customers. They may not come back. It's taking a long time to interact with the site. It's taking a long time for the pages to appear correctly. And if we've got those issues, that will obviously lead to customer dissatisfaction. So it's important that we address these elements. And this is another way to get buy-in for people to do stuff on your site. If you're getting a 16% decrease in customer satisfaction, that's going to impact on your revenue and your bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth mentioning something which I think we briefly touched on when we're talking about mobile and desktop browsing. But in the UK and in the West, where our infrastructure is quite good, so we do have we've got fast devices, we've got fast internet speeds, things like that. But elsewhere in the world, it can still be quite slow, and people will still be using dial-up in some places. And so focusing on Core Web Vitals and page speed is going to be even more critical if your audience is in places where the internet may not be as stable and as reliable, because that's going to provide the better experience for them.
Yeah, I think so. Another thing to remember as well is that Core Web Vitals, this is the initial version that we get in a moment. It will evolve over time. And the thing to remember really about it is that it reinforces Google's focus on page experience. You can see that with analytics as well. We're starting to see with Google Analytics that, you know, there's a lot of focus on user experience. It's gone from being just pure metrics to user experience now. How long people are spending on the page, how long they're coming back, what are they doing when they're on those pages? Is it a positive experience or a negative experience? And I think, you know, Core Web Vitals will definitely become more prominent as a ranking factor. And as it gets more sophisticated and it gets more merged into the existing algorithm, it will become a much more relevant and prominent factor than it is at this moment in time. I mean, they're testing it at the moment to some extent. It's here for good. It's going to be here for good. They're going to keep this because they need to understand that page experience. It's almost like they want to complete the whole experience. They've got the metrics in terms of sessions, etc., but they just haven't got that metric that will give them a good understanding of a page experience. In terms of other things that would possibly happen is, you know, it's possible that, you know, Google could examine the Core Web Vitals of external links in order to determine link quality. You know, so if you're getting a lot of links from poor quality sites, they might think, you know, well, they're never going to get to these sites anyway. Why should we give any value to those?
It could be a way that they can start more effectively weeding out content farms and link farms and all those junk in your backlink profile. Maybe this is going to be a better step in that direction to
definitely
actually detecting those sorts of things, which would be interesting.
Yeah, I can see that definitely. I can see that, you know, if a site's, you know, performing, because a lot of the link networks, you know, a lot of those link networks don't get a lot of visitors anywhere, and they're built in a specific way. They're built to be as simple as possible, and it may be that, you know, the quality of the page experience, it may be that, you know, it's using an old version of WordPress templates or whatever, that, you know, in order to cut costs, that may prove to be, you know, detrimental in terms of Core Web Vital experience. I think the other thing to remember as well is content management systems, the systems that you're using, you know, to build your content in your websites. They'll need to improve to address these Core Web Vital requirements. We're already seeing this with WordPress and the new Gutenberg content editor, which is removing any bloated code and looking to address speed issues. Some of the tools that you're using at the moment may have to be upgraded. You know, things like Elementor. If you're using WordPress, you may find that creates too much code, or the version that you're using may produce too much code and may need amending. I'm sure these guys, you know, the content management systems, will be looking at this. You know, and things like the open source stuff like Ep02 for e-commerce and Drupal for content management systems. I'm sure they're looking at it as well. Their open source developers will be trying to address these issues and maybe even create extensions or plugins that will look at these. I mean, I've seen stuff in relation to WordPress where some of the extensions that they've got are already looking at how they can improve Core Web Vital speed with plugins. And then maybe more sites will move over to using content delivery networks like Cloudflare and Amazon CloudFront. At the moment, obviously, the bigger e-commerce sites are using those, you know, Amazon and Argos and people like that. They're always using content delivery networks because they've got a large amount of content on the sites as well. But I think even some of the smaller sites may even have to have content delivery networks that are scalable. So there may be an opportunity for new content delivery networks to set up, you know, and specifically dealing with making sure that sites match up with recommendations from Core Web Vitals.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of work for all of us to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very true. That, and like I said, a lot of the things we spoke about today, particularly the stuff like first contentful paint, things like that, they are elements that are important. I mean, the thing to remember is that, regardless of what they're called, whether it's large contentful paint, first input delay, or cumulative layout shift, the three key things to remember from Core Web Vitals is that it's all about loading, how quickly your page loads, interactivity, how quickly an individual can interact with your page, and visual stability, which is essentially how quickly, how stable is that page? How is the content on that page? Is it moving about? Is it bouncing? Is it doing anything silly? So those are the three Core Web Vital things. And if you think about it logically, from your own experiences of using the web and looking at specific websites, you've found that at some point you have been frustrated by any of those factors I've just mentioned. You will have found that, and you can see why Google's done this. You can see it's important for them to address these issues and to make the actual visitor experience as good as possible.
Yeah, and rewarding those that focus on it as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it will reward you if you address these issues. Definitely will reward you in some way, not just by improving your rankings, but probably improving your leads and revenue.
Yeah,
because we spoke about page speed already, and how it had an impact. If you think about it sensibly, that 7% drop in e-commerce revenue for every second that your page takes to load. The quicker you get the individual to that page and get them interacting with that page, the more likely you are to sell. You're more likely to get them to engage with you in order to interact and do an activity with you. So, I mean, these are the key things about Core Web Vitals. It's not just about Google having a metric which will allow them to understand what a page is about. It's about making sure that the user experience of it for your site is as effective as possible and as good as possible.
Yeah, it's a measurement for business for all for businesses, kind of all areas of the business, not just SEO or developers. And what's also interesting as well is that it could well be that some of the larger, bigger fish that typically tend to win when it comes to things like this, they are probably the ones that are going to have more difficulty in these changes, whereas it'll be the smaller businesses that can be much more agile at getting these things done. So hopefully it will be interesting and shake up the SERPs a little bit.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, it should be quite interesting over the next after May. We should see some changes in terms of it, and we will revisit this. Obviously, we'll revisit Core Web Vitals and give you some more information as to what we find about it. It is relatively new to some extent with regards to SEO as well. So we're learning as we're going along as well. But as we find out more information, we'll be able to advise you and give you more information on it.
Yeah, we'll catch up. Well, it's been a good chat, Adrian.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. It's really good to talk about these things. Like I said, for me, the most important thing to take away from this is don't panic about developing your site and all these issues. Just look at them, look at your Core Web Vitals, and it will give you a pointer to what you need to do. It may be that you have to plan it in over a couple of months. It might be planning for your next version of the website when you build it. It may be the opportunity for you as a marketing team to go back to the stakeholders and say, look, it's time for us to have a new website. That's another thing to look at. It may be that, we need a new website, and now you can explain to them why we need a new website, because Google are telling us the one we've got doesn't interact that well, it doesn't load that well, and it doesn't look that good on mobile. So these are all things that you can go back to your stakeholders with and discuss in a little bit more detail, and you've got a little bit more stuff in your armory really to explain to them why you need a new version of the website.
Exactly. It removes some of the subjectivity of experience and user experience, because you could argue all day about what makes a good user experience, even if they're completely different viewpoints. But with these, it's giving you a benchmark. Yeah,
I think that's very true. That's the other side of it as well. That it's giving you an opportunity to work alongside Google.
Yeah.
I mean, we sometimes think, we're working, sometimes people think to an extent SEOs work against Google because they're trying to game them, but we're not really. What we're trying to do is make the best experience possible for users and get like you said, Tiff, get rewarded for that by Google. The better the experience a user has, the more likely they are to buy, the more likely they are to engage, the more likely to come back to that site. So those are the key things from SEO that we want. And Core Web Vitals, I see it as a way for us to identify those issues and to fix them.
Yeah, and make the internet a better place.
Exactly, yeah, as we always do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we will catch up again soon. Thank you all for joining us. See you later.
See you later.